What if the deepest form of love is the quietest? Not the grand declarations, not the flowers or the words, but the silence between them, the kind that listens, that holds, that says, "I'm here." How often do we think we're loving someone when we're really just waiting to speak? How often do we interrupt their truth with our own? In a world built on noise, real listening has become rare. Yet it's the simplest, most sacred gift we can offer another soul, to witness them fully, without trying to fix, explain, or control. The Stoics knew this long before we did. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Learn to listen, and you will benefit even from those who talk badly." Because listening isn't just for understanding others, it's how we come to know ourselves. This video isn't about communication tips. It's about presence, power, and how true love is felt not in what you say, but in how deeply you hear. So if something in you longs for more grounded connection, more peace, more meaning in how you love, subscribe to Stoic now. Like this video, and stay with me, because what you're about to hear may change how you listen forever. Number 1. Why we struggle to listen. We often think listening is easy. We assume that hearing another person speak means we're present. But hearing is not listening. And most of the time, what we call listening is really just waiting. Waiting for our turn to speak. Waiting to defend. Waiting to be right. The truth is, we struggle to listen, not because we don't care, but because we've never been taught how. In a world that rewards expression over reflection, quick answers over deep understanding, we've been conditioned to speak louder, faster, and more often. The result? Conversations that feel more like combat than connection. Social media hasn't helped. We scroll through highlight reels, react to headlines, and comment on things we barely understand. Every platform is designed to amplify our voice, not deepen our listening. And in that echo chamber of our own opinions, we lose touch with the stillness required to truly hear someone else. But the root of this problem goes even deeper than our phones. It lives inside us. It's the ego, the quiet, constant need to be heard, validated, right. The ego doesn't like silence. It sees listening as vulnerability. It fears that if we truly pause to understand another, we might have to change. And change, to the ego, feels like death. So we armor up. We interrupt. We assume. We offer advice not because it's needed, but because it makes us feel useful. We hijack someone else's moment to share our own. We tell ourselves we're helping, but often, we're just avoiding discomfort. Psychologists call this the defensive ear. It's a subconscious filter that kicks in when we feel criticized, misunderstood, or emotionally unsafe. Instead of listening, we begin scanning for threats. We focus on our next rebuttal. We replay old arguments in our heads. And in doing so, we completely abandon the person in front of us. This pattern shows up most painfully in our closest relationships. Picture a couple in conflict. One partner opens up, says something raw, maybe even a little messy. The other, feeling attacked, jumps in to explain, to correct, to clarify. But in that moment, what was needed wasn't logic. It was presence. What was needed was space. And yet, we rarely offer it, because we've been taught to fix, to defend, to prove, not to listen. Epictetus warned us of this centuries ago. "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth," he said, "so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." This wasn't just a clever saying, it was a call to humility. A reminder that wisdom begins where ego ends. To truly listen requires restraint. It asks us to hold our judgments like fragile glass. It asks us to quiet the internal monologue long enough to enter another person's world, not to evaluate or compare, but to simply be there. That's uncomfortable, but it's also the beginning of intimacy. And yet, discomfort is something most of us avoid. In conversation, silence can feel awkward. But the Stoics teach us that silence is not a void, it's a container. It's the space where truth can breathe. So why don't we listen? Because listening demands more than attention. It demands surrender. It demands that we set aside our need to be right, our desire to be seen, our compulsion to fix. It asks us to become a mirror, not a spotlight. But here's the paradox. When we stop trying to be heard, we start to truly connect. When we stop needing to be understood, we begin to understand. Take this example. A man once told me his father never really heard him. They spoke often about work, sports, the weather, but never about what mattered. One day, he finally opened up, shared something vulnerable, and his father, uncomfortable, unsure, quickly changed the subject. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to stay in that space. That moment stayed with him for years, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't heard. Listening is more than an act of attention, it's an act of love. And yet, in our fear of discomfort, we trade presence for performance. We offer advice instead of empathy. We fill the air with words when all that was needed was stillness. Seneca once said, "It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence." Most of us live out of season, speaking when we should be listening, reacting when we should be reflecting. And that imbalance costs us. It costs us connection, clarity, and peace. But the good news is this: listening is not a talent. It's a discipline. It can be practiced, cultivated, honed. And the more we practice it, not just with others, but with ourselves, the more we reclaim the depth we've lost in this age of noise. So if you find yourself struggling to listen, you're not alone. You're human. You've been raised in a culture that shouts. But you can unlearn that. You can return to something older, quieter, and far more powerful. You can begin again. And in doing so, you may discover that the silence you once feared was actually the doorway to love. Number 2, the dangers of not listening in love. Not all heartbreak arrives with shouting and slamming doors. Sometimes it enters silently, through missed words, misunderstood glances, and the slow erosion of presence. The truth is, most relationships don't fall apart because of one explosive moment. They fall apart because, somewhere along the way, one or both people stopped listening. Not because they stopped caring, but because they stopped hearing. Love is not just something we feel, it's something we practice. And the practice of love begins with attention. But when listening fades, so does that practice. Without even realizing it, we replace presence with assumption. We begin to speak over each other, finish each other's sentences not out of affection, but out of impatience. We stop asking, "How are you?" Really? And start assuming we already know. And in that assumption, something sacred gets lost. Consider this: how many arguments are really about the issue at hand, and how many are rooted in feeling unheard? How many "I'm fine" responses are actually silent screams for connection? We don't always need solutions. We need space. And when that space is denied, love begins to suffocate. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." In the context of love, this means recognizing when our impulse to react is drowning out our ability to understand. It means choosing presence over pride. I knew a couple, let's call them Sarah and David. They were, by all appearances, solid. Smart, successful, well-spoken. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Sarah often said she didn't feel seen. David, confused and defensive, would respond, "Of course I see you. I do everything for us." But what Sarah needed wasn't action. It was attention. Not the kind you give a problem you're trying to fix, but the kind you give a person you're trying to know. She didn't need him to agree or to explain himself. She needed him to pause, to look her in the eye, to let her words land without rushing to reshape them. But that never happened. Each time she opened up, he filled the silence with reason, logic, solutions. And eventually, she stopped talking. That's how it often ends, not with betrayal, but with withdrawal. With two people sitting across from each other, still sharing a home, but no longer sharing their inner world. When we stop listening, we don't just miss words, we miss warning signs. We miss the moments when someone is reaching out in their own quiet way. We miss the tone behind their voice, the tremble in their breath, the stories left untold. And over time, that distance hardens. Misunderstandings grow roots. Resentment replaces curiosity. The most painful part? We rarely know it's happening until it's too late. The Stoics understood that love requires discipline, not just of action, but of attention. To love well is to be vigilant, not paranoid. To listen, not just to words, but to silences. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In love, that means don't echo neglect with neglect. Don't meet disconnection with distance. Meet it with presence. And presence begins with listening. But listening doesn't mean agreeing. It doesn't mean absorbing blame or tolerating harm. It simply means creating space. Enough space for truth to emerge without fear of being shut down or spun into something else. When you offer that kind of space to someone you love, you offer them something more powerful than advice. You offer them the dignity of being known. And when you don't, when your listening is selective, impatient, or transactional, you might win the argument, but you lose the connection. Ask yourself, when was the last time you listened to your partner without interrupting, without defending, without planning your reply? When was the last time you allowed their truth to stand on its own, raw, imperfect, unedited? If the answer is, "I'm not sure," you're not alone. We all fall short. We all drift. But the good news is that listening, like love, can be returned to, repaired, reclaimed. And it often starts in the smallest moments, not during big fights or long talks, but in the everyday silence between words. The way you put down your phone when they speak. The pause before you respond. The look that says, "I'm here." We don't need to be perfect listeners, but we need to be present ones. Because when love is not heard, it doesn't grow. It withers. It contracts. It hides behind routines and responsibilities and unspoken frustration. But when it is heard, fully, patiently, attentively, it expands. It softens. It breathes. So if you want to love someone better, start here. Start with your ears, with your eyes, with your silence. Because sometimes the greatest proof of love isn't what you say, it's how well you listen when they speak. Number 3, what Stoicism teaches about listening. To listen well is not merely to stay silent while someone else speaks. It is to quiet the noise within us long enough to receive what is being offered, not just in words, but in emotion, in energy, in essence. And no philosophy has honored this inner stillness more profoundly than Stoicism. The ancient Stoics didn't write manuals on communication. They wrote meditations on mastery of the self. Yet within those writings is an unshakable truth. Before we can listen to others, we must first learn to listen to ourselves. Seneca once wrote, "Silence is a lesson learned through life's many sufferings." What he meant wasn't that silence is the absence of sound, but that it's the presence of composure, the kind you only earn after weathering storms and realizing that most problems don't need more words, they need more wisdom. And wisdom is born from silence. Stoicism teaches us to value restraint, not as a sign of passivity, but as a sign of strength. In a culture obsessed with opinions, responses, and reactions, restraint is revolutionary. When someone shares a vulnerable truth and you resist the urge to correct them, to insert yourself, to turn their pain into your performance, that's Stoicism in practice. It's not that the Stoics avoided emotion. They just didn't allow it to rule them. They believed in observing one's thoughts and feelings with the same clarity one might observe clouds passing across the sky. To listen in a Stoic way is to do the same with the words of another, to let them arrive fully, without interruption, and to let them land before offering anything in return. This may sound simple, but in practice, it's radical. Because most people listen in order to speak. But the Stoic listens in order to see, clearly, patiently, and without bias. To see not just the surface of what is said, but the root beneath it. The pain beneath the anger. The fear beneath the silence. The longing beneath the laughter. Marcus Aurelius, in his personal meditations, reminded himself daily to observe the world not as he wished it to be, but as it truly was. That's the heart of Stoic listening. Meeting someone exactly where they are, without needing to edit, shape, or fix them. This doesn't mean you accept everything as truth, but it means you honor what is real for the other person in that moment. And sometimes, that's all they need. Think about the last time someone truly listened to you. Not with their mouth half open, waiting to jump in, but with a stillness that made you feel safe, seen, and held. That experience stays with you, doesn't it? It lingers. It heals. Now ask, when was the last time you offered that gift to someone else? In our modern age, where debate has replaced dialogue and reaction has replaced reflection, listening with Stoic presence is rare. But it's also more necessary than ever. When we listen through a Stoic lens, we do so without attachment. We do not need to be right. We do not need to be validated. We are not threatened by discomfort, nor driven by the urge to control. We simply hold space for truth to rise, for pain to soften, for love to return to the conversation. This is especially important in conflict. The Stoics never taught avoidance. On the contrary, they taught confrontation with honesty, with dignity, with calm. When you bring that energy to a disagreement, something shifts. The other person feels it. They realize you are not there to win. You are there to understand. And that changes everything. It's not about being silent out of fear. It's about being silent out of strength. The Stoic listener knows that words have weight, and that the heaviest words are often not the loudest, but the most well-timed. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Just a breath, a nod, a pause long enough for someone to truly feel heard. To do this, you must practice. You must catch yourself in the moments you rush to interrupt, defend, or fix. You must become aware of the stories running in your mind while someone else is speaking. You must ask, am I listening to them, or just to my own thoughts? This is the Stoic path, not perfection, but presence. Not silence for silence's sake, but silence that makes room for clarity. And the beautiful irony? When you begin to listen in this way, you start to notice something else. People begin to open up. Conversations deepen. Conflicts soften. And love, real love, grounded love, finds its way back to the space between you. Because when someone feels truly heard, they feel safe. And when they feel safe, they become more themselves. That's the essence of Stoic listening. Not to change others, but to create the conditions in which others can change themselves, freely, willingly, and in their own time. So the next time someone speaks to you, remember, your silence isn't empty. It's sacred. Let it hold them. Let it teach you. Let it speak. Number 4, the emotional power of listening. There are moments in life when words fail. When someone we love is in pain, when their world is crumbling and no advice can fix it, we feel helpless. And yet, it's in those very moments that our greatest power emerges. Not through what we say, but through how we stay, how we listen. To truly listen is to give another person the experience of being emotionally held without being judged, rushed, or reshaped. It's the art of presence, not performance. And it has the quiet power to heal in ways that even love, left unspoken, cannot. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that when someone feels heard, deeply, without interruption, their brain releases oxytocin, the hormone associated with trust, bonding, and safety. Just being attentively present with someone can literally shift their internal chemistry, lowering stress, softening defenses, and helping them feel emotionally safe again. Think about that. In a world that's constantly shouting, one of the most radical acts you can offer is stillness. This is not about listening as a skill. It's about listening as love. When someone shares their heart with you, be it joy or pain, they are not just offering information. They are handing you something sacred. And in that moment, your task is not to fix or correct, but to protect, to hold it with care, to honor the vulnerability it takes to speak something real in a world so quick to dismiss. Seneca said, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." Listening is one of the most profound forms of kindness we possess. It says, "You matter. Your inner world matters. I will make space for it." Too often, we underestimate how deeply someone aches to be heard. We assume that if they aren't saying much, they must be fine. But silence is not always peace. Sometimes, silence is the sound of someone giving up on being understood. I remember hearing a story about a young boy who was acting out at school, angry, distant, disconnected. Teachers tried to correct his behavior. Counselors gave him tools. Nothing worked. Until one day, someone simply sat beside him at lunch. Didn't lecture. Didn't pry. Just sat. Present. Available. Eventually, the boy spoke. Not because he was asked, but because he finally felt safe. That moment didn't require training. It required presence. And that presence began to change him. Adults are no different. We may hide it behind intellect, success, or sarcasm. But deep down, every human being carries that same quiet question: am I being heard? When the answer is yes, something softens. Something opens. In romantic relationships, this is especially powerful. We often think passion is sustained through grand gestures or perfect compatibility. But the truth is, emotional safety sustains love. And emotional safety begins with listening. When your partner speaks, do they feel like they're talking to a wall or to a window? A wall blocks. A wall reflects your own insecurities, your own defensiveness. A wall listens only to reply. But a window lets their truth in. It allows light to move between two souls. It doesn't distort, it receives. That's what listening does. It turns walls into windows. I've spoken with people on the brink of divorce who admitted they didn't even know how they got there. "We just drifted apart," they'd say. But when we trace the line back, it almost always begins with a breakdown in listening. One person no longer felt heard, so they stopped speaking. The other never noticed, because they were too busy trying to be understood themselves. That is the tragedy, and it's preventable. Listening is not flashy. It's not loud. It doesn't win debates or steal the spotlight. But it is the ground on which all lasting love is built. The Stoics, though often mistaken for emotionally cold, understood this deeply. They believed in emotional mastery, not emotional suppression. They knew that to be fully present with another required strength. The kind of strength that can withstand discomfort without turning away. The kind that can hold space for pain without rushing to erase it. Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." In love, we often assume we know our partner, what they think, what they need, what they'll say next. And in that assumption, we stop listening. We tune out the very person we claim to care for most. But when we return to listening, not just hearing, but listening, we rediscover them. And sometimes, we rediscover ourselves, too. Because the act of listening is never one way. As you hold space for someone else's truth, you begin to hear the quiet within your own soul. You hear your patterns, your fears, your own longing to be met with the same grace you offer. This reciprocity creates emotional resonance. And that resonance is what makes a relationship feel like home. So if you want to build or rebuild trust, don't start with words. Start with silence. Start with the sacred space of your attention. Let your presence say what your voice cannot. Let your stillness become the proof that their heart is safe here. Because when someone feels heard, they no longer have to shout. They no longer have to explain or defend or repeat themselves in 1,000 frustrated ways. They can just be. And that being is where love breathes again. Number 5, the listener's mirror. How listening changes you. It begins subtly. The moment you stop speaking and start truly listening, something shifts. Not just in the conversation, but in you. Your breath slows. Your defenses drop. You begin to realize, this isn't just about understanding someone else. It's about meeting yourself, without the noise, without the narrative, without the need to always be right. This is the hidden power of listening. While it may seem like a gift you give to others, it is, in truth, one of the greatest gifts you give to yourself. Because in every act of deep listening, you learn something new, not just about the speaker, but about your own patterns, your impatience, your judgments, your discomfort with silence. And when you observe these things without self-criticism, but with gentle curiosity, you begin the work of inner transformation. The Stoics knew this well. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, didn't write for an audience. He wrote to himself. He listened inward, not outward, and through that quiet reflection, he shaped his character. If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change, he wrote. It is the truth I seek, and the truth never harmed anyone. To listen well, you must value truth over ego. That is no small thing, because ego wants to win. Ego wants to be heard. Ego fears silence because silence makes space for vulnerability, and vulnerability feels unsafe. But the Stoic knows that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the root of real strength. When you choose to listen instead of interrupt, when you pause instead of react, when you ask instead of assume, you are not just changing the course of a conversation. You are reshaping who you are. Listening becomes a mirror. And like any mirror, it reveals what's there, unfiltered and honest. You start to see how much you crave control, how often you mistake being right for being wise, how easily you fill silence with stories that serve your pride but starve your peace. And then, if you're willing, you grow. Listening humbles you. It reminds you that every person, no matter how different, carries a reality just as vivid, valid, and complex as your own. That someone else's truth does not diminish yours. That you can hold space for another without losing your place in the story. In this way, listening becomes a spiritual practice, a ritual of self-forgetting that paradoxically brings you closer to your true self. You become less reactive, more grounded, less driven by judgment, more open to nuance. You stop needing to control the narrative and start trusting that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. You begin to live more slowly, more attentively, more consciously. This shift echoes outward. People feel it. They feel safer around you, not because you have the answers, but because you make space for theirs. They feel seen, not analyzed, heard, not managed. And in return, many will start to listen back. Not all, but many. Even those who don't will feel the difference. And more importantly, so will you. This is what makes the Stoic listener unshakable. Not that they are emotionless, but that they are centered. They don't need to dominate the room. because they've already made peace with the silence inside themselves. That peace shows up in everyday moments. When you let someone finish their sentence without rushing in. When you sit with a friend's pain without trying to dilute it. When you listen to your partner's frustration without taking it personally. When you walk away from a heated moment not in defeat, but in self-respect. Every one of those moments is a choice. A choice to be present instead of powerful. To be curious instead of controlling. And each choice builds the character of someone who is not just loving, but love itself. There's a quiet dignity in that. It doesn't shout. It doesn't seek applause. But it transforms every room it enters. Because deep listening is rare. It's a kind of attention that has become almost sacred in a world so hungry to be heard. But you can offer it. Not perfectly, not always, but more today than yesterday. More in this moment than the last. And with each small act of listening, you refine the mirror. You see yourself more clearly. You soften. You strengthen. You remember that this life is not just about being understood, but about understanding. So listen, not just for others, but for yourself. Let their stories teach you. Let their truths stretch you. Let their silences become invitations to go deeper, not just with them, but with your own soul. Because in the end, to listen is to love, and to love is to become. The quietest love is the loudest. And perhaps that is where the journey always leads. Not to more noise, more cleverness, or more answers, but to less. To less interruption, less ego, less need to control. When you begin to listen deeply, you start to realize love isn't loud. It doesn't demand. It doesn't constantly explain itself. True love, mature love, is quiet. It watches. It waits. It hears the unspoken. It listens. Not because it has to, but because it chooses to. Again and again. You see, the greatest love you can give another person is the space to be fully themselves in your presence. And that space is built not with words, but with silence that listens. A silence that says, "You're safe here. I'm not rushing you. I'm not shaping you. I'm simply here with you." The world doesn't teach us this. The world teaches urgency, persuasion, quick replies, fast emotions. But love, real love, moves differently. It flows slowly, like water carving stone. It doesn't need to force. It trusts the process of presence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best answer to anger is silence." And I would add, the best answer to love is also silence. The kind of silence that listens, that softens, that heals, that holds. Maybe what your partner needs isn't one more opinion, but just 5 minutes of your undivided attention. Maybe what your friend is really asking isn't for advice, but for understanding. Maybe the person you've been trying so hard to help doesn't need your words. They need your quiet belief in their ability to find their own way. And maybe you need the same. Maybe you, too, are tired of being talked over, fixed, corrected. Maybe all you're longing for is someone who will sit beside you and say nothing, but mean everything. So start there. Become what you've always needed. Be the stillness you never received. And in doing so, you offer others the greatest invitation of all, not to be improved, but to be embraced. Because that is the loudest love there is. If this message has touched something within you, if it reminded you of someone you love, someone you miss, or even someone you're still learning how to hear, then I invite you to share this video with them. Let it be the beginning of a new conversation, or maybe a sacred silence. If you found this meaningful, I welcome you to subscribe to this channel, Stoic Now, where we don't chase noise. We return to stillness, together. And if you'd like to share your story of love, of loss, of learning to listen, leave a comment. This space is yours too, without judgment, without interruption, just presence. Because sometimes, all the heart really wants is to be heard.